I never thought a quiet Saturday night could turn into something that would haunt me for weeks. My husband, Mark, had invited a few of his friends over for what he called just a casual dinner party. The apartment smelled faintly of garlic and roasted chicken, the candles flickering in the dim living room light. Everything looked ordinary, too ordinary, maybe. I was in the kitchen, arranging the last plate of roasted vegetables, when I noticed Luke leaning against the counter. Luke, one of Mark's younger friends, maybe 25, had this awkward energy about him, half charm, half hesitance. He smiled at me, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. There was something about the way he watched me, as if he was memorizing small details no one else noticed. The way my hair fell over my shoulder, the hesitation in my movements, the faint laugh I tried to hide behind my hand. I felt my chest tighten, like I'd accidentally walked into a spotlight I hadn't asked for. Mark was chatting loudly across the room, holding a glass of wine too tightly, gesturing as if he was on stage. His friends laughed, a little too long, a little too sharp, and I felt a flicker of unease. There's a rhythm to these dinner parties, a certain predictability. Someone tells a story, everyone laughs, a few drinks are poured, and then everyone goes home. But tonight, something felt off. The first hint came when Mark suggested a game. I froze for a moment, thinking maybe he meant a light-hearted quiz or charades. But the way his eyes flicked to Luke, and the smirk that tugged at the corner of his mouth, told me this was different. Luke's expression shifted too, nervous, excited, almost daring. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was overthinking. But then Mark's friend James, always the instigator, leaned forward and whispered something to Luke, and I caught the words, "Wait until she sees it." My stomach dropped. I took a step back, gripping the edge of the counter, feeling the wood dig into my palms. The laughter around the table started to feel like it was coming from a different room, from somewhere I wasn't allowed to enter. Luke kept glancing at me, eyes darkening in a way that made my pulse thud too fast. I wanted to say something, anything, but my throat had gone dry. Mark didn't notice. Or maybe he did, and he didn't care. And then he stood, clinking his glass to get everyone's attention, and said, "Okay, everyone. Time for the real fun." I froze. The words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. I didn't know what the real fun meant, but I had a bad feeling. I stepped closer to the door, ready to slip out unnoticed, but Luke's hand brushed mine just as I passed. His fingers lingered, and I could feel his gaze burning into me. For some reason, I couldn't pull away. And just like that, the first card of the game was revealed. The card Mark pulled from the deck had everyone leaning in, whispering, smirking, but I couldn't read it. My mind kept circling back to Luke, the way he lingered near me, his gaze uncomfortably persistent. I had always thought I knew my husband, the rhythm of his life, the boundaries we shared. But tonight, everything felt uncharted. Mark, for all his confident charm, had always been the kind of man who thrived on being the center of attention. His friends adored him, or feared disappointing him. They all shared inside jokes, memories I wasn't part of. And yet, as I watched them, I realized I hadn't really looked at them closely in years. There were subtle dynamics, glances and half-smiles, and an unspoken hierarchy I only noticed now. Luke, by contrast, felt like a ripple in that pond, new, unpredictable. There was something about the way he tilted his head when listening, the slight hesitation before he laughed at Mark's jokes, that made me feel exposed, somehow. I kept brushing my fingers over the rim of my wine glass, pretending to check something on my phone, but I couldn't stop noticing how his gaze followed every small movement I made. I thought back to my own life, the choices that had led me here. Mid-40s, comfortable, maybe a little too predictable. Mark and I had been together over a decade, and while we were happy, our marriage had its quiet gaps, the small silences, the missed chances to really talk. I wasn't proud of how often I brushed things under the rug, how much I avoided tension rather than face it. Maybe that was why Luke's attention unsettled me. It reminded me of something I had buried, something I didn't have words for. The apartment itself seemed to shift with the tension. The lights were dim, shadows pooling in corners where laughter didn't reach. The scent of garlic and rosemary lingered, mingling with the faint tang of wine. The clatter of cutlery on plates suddenly sounded louder, sharper, like it punctuated the silence between people who were watching, waiting. Mark was laughing too much, trying to keep the energy high, but his voice carried a strange edge I hadn't heard before. James nudged him, whispered something, and Mark's smile flickered. Luke caught my eye again, and for a moment, it was just the two of us in the room, the chaos of the dinner party fading into the background. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I realized then that whatever this game was, it wasn't just a silly party trick. Something had already shifted. And deep down, I knew the night would not end the way it had started. And yet, I couldn't leave. Not now. Because Luke was still watching, and the tension between us, it had just begun. The game started quietly, almost innocently. Mark shuffled a deck of cards and began reading prompts aloud, questions meant to reveal secrets, confessions, or embarrassing moments. Everyone laughed at first, the kind of easy laughter that fills a room, but I noticed the undercurrent of unease, the way glances lingered a little too long. Luke didn't laugh at all. He just watched me, and the way he leaned forward, fingers drumming lightly against the edge of the table, made my stomach tighten in a way I couldn't name. I told myself to focus on Mark, on the game, but I couldn't stop noticing how Luke's eyes caught every detail, the slight tremble in my hands as I poured myself a drink, the way I tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, overcompensating for nerves. Then came the first reveal. A card read, "Share a secret you've never told anyone here." There was a pause. James snorted, leaning back in his chair. Mark grinned, as if daring someone to go first. I wanted to say nothing, to smile politely and pretend I hadn't noticed how Luke's gaze lingered on me. But Luke, to everyone's surprise, went first. He spoke quietly, almost too quickly, about something trivial from his childhood, and yet there was a subtle intensity beneath his words, like he was testing the waters. Mark nodded, satisfied, and turned to me. "Your turn," he said, tone playful but with an edge I didn't like. I hesitated. I should have deflected, laughed it off, but something in Luke's expression held me captive. I swallowed, forcing a smile I didn't feel, and muttered something vague about an old mistake I barely wanted to think about. Luke's eyes softened, but not with judgment. Something else, something heavier. His hand brushed against mine, almost accidentally, but I felt it as a jolt. I wanted to pull away, but I didn't. The night went on like this, small confessions, teasing laughter, and moments where Luke's attention made me simultaneously nervous and unreasonably flustered. I kept catching Mark watching us too, raising an eyebrow, smirking, but saying nothing. It made me wonder what he knew, or suspected. And then the card that changed the room. Name the person here you've thought about when no one else was around. The laughter died down. Even Mark hesitated. I felt my pulse spike, my hands gripping my glass so tightly my knuckles whitened. Luke looked at me, and his gaze wasn't playful anymore. There was something raw there, like a question I wasn't ready to answer. I wanted to speak, to redirect, but the words stuck in my throat. My husband's friends exchanged quick, curious glances. The tension thickened, pressing into the corners of the room. And in that moment, I realized the game had stopped being just a game. Something unspoken had shifted, and I wasn't sure if I wanted it to go back. The room had shifted. Laughter was thinner now, almost cautious. Even Mark, who usually thrived on chaos, seemed slightly off balance. I could feel it in the air, the kind of tension that makes your skin itch, makes small movements feel louder than they are. Luke didn't speak much, but he didn't need to. His eyes were on me like a quiet accusation, like he was waiting for me to reveal something I hadn't even realized I was hiding. Every brush of our fingers as I reached for the wine felt charged, like a current I couldn't control. I wanted to pull away, but my body refused. Mark was still trying to keep things light, reading cards aloud, making jokes, laughing at his friends' nervous confessions. But his eyes flicked to us now and then, sharp and knowing. There was amusement there, yes, but also something calculating. I felt a prickle of suspicion. What did he want to see? What was he really hoping would happen? The next card came, and I froze. Who here have you secretly envied or admired? James answered quickly, grinning, and the others laughed. I could feel the heat creeping up my neck. Luke didn't answer immediately. He tilted his head, eyes narrowing in thought, and then, without looking away from me, said softly, "I think some admiration is obvious." A nervous giggle escaped me, but it sounded hollow even to my own ears. The comment hung there, heavier than it should have been. Everyone else laughed politely, but I sensed the weight pressing down, the room suddenly smaller. Mark's smirk faltered, and he leaned forward slightly, voice lower. "Care to elaborate?" I wanted to escape. I wanted to vanish into the shadows of the apartment, but I was rooted in place. I realized I was trembling slightly, though I wasn't sure if it was from fear, anticipation, or something else entirely. Luke's gaze softened, almost vulnerable now, and I felt an ache I didn't recognize. Something long buried, something I thought I had left behind years ago. The game had moved past trivial secrets. It was no longer about fun or laughter. It was about exposure, about watching and being watched. The casual rules of the evening had shifted into something fragile and dangerous. And then, a small noise from the kitchen, a glass clinking against the counter, made everyone turn. It was a trivial sound, but in the quiet that followed, it felt like a signal. My heart raced. Luke's eyes followed mine toward the kitchen, and for a moment, it was like we were the only two people in a room. I didn't know what he was thinking. I didn't know what Mark was thinking. I didn't even fully know what I was thinking. But I did know one thing: the night had crossed a line. And whatever happened next, there was no going back. I thought I had prepared myself for the night's tension. I thought I had built a wall of composure around me. But then Mark drew another card, and everything shifted. Reveal someone here you've ever secretly wanted to impress or influence. The room went quieter than I expected. Even James, usually the loudest, coughed and glanced around nervously. My stomach sank. I knew the moment demanded honesty, but honesty felt like stepping off a cliff. Luke's gaze caught mine. There was something different in it now, a deliberate intensity that made my pulse hit a fast rhythm. His fingers brushed mine again, this time lingering longer than before, almost as if testing boundaries. I pulled my hand back slightly, but my heart refused to follow. Mark's smirk had a new edge, playful, yes, but sharper. "Go on," he said. "Don't hold back." I forced a laugh, but it faltered. I don't think I should answer that one," I muttered. Luke tilted his head, watching me. "Why not?" he asked softly, voice low enough that only I could hear. There was no mockery, no challenge, just curiosity, and something else I couldn't name. Something heavy and warm that made my throat dry. Before I could respond, James piped up with a joke to diffuse the tension, but it fell flat. The room was already charged, and the air felt thick enough to taste. I realized, with a jolt, that everyone was watching me, not just expecting an answer, but waiting for a fracture, a hint of what I had been hiding beneath the surface all these years. And then, out of nowhere, Luke spoke. Not a joke, not a confession, just a statement. Sometimes, the person you think is untouchable notices you more than you realize. I froze. My glass slipped slightly in my hand. The words weren't directed at me, or maybe they were. My pulse thudded painfully in my ears. The others glanced at him, confused, but Mark's smirk wavered. For a brief second, I saw the calculations behind his eyes, the way he realized the game had spun out of his control. Everything felt suspended in that fragile moment. Luke's gaze didn't waver. He leaned just slightly closer, and for the first time, the playful energy of the game felt real, intimate, and dangerous all at once. My hand shook, and I bit my lip without thinking, trying to anchor myself. The room had become smaller, tighter, like the walls themselves were pressing in. I realized the game had stopped being about confessions or fun. It was about attention, desire, exposure, and I had already crossed the invisible line. And then Mark, trying to regain control, laughed loudly and drew the next card. But the words on it didn't matter. I wasn't listening anymore. All I could feel was the heat of Luke's gaze, and the slow, impossible realization that nothing in this room, or my life, would ever feel normal again. The next card Mark drew seemed heavier than all the others combined. He held it up like a small bomb waiting to explode. Reveal the person here who has affected you the most, positively or negatively. A hush fell over the room. Even the background clinking of glasses and faint hum of the kitchen seemed to fade. My heart thudded in my chest like a drum I couldn't control. Luke's eyes met mine, steady and unflinching, and suddenly I understood. This wasn't just a game anymore. I looked around at the faces I thought I knew. Mark's friends leaned forward, curiosity sharp in their expressions. Mark himself tilted his head, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corner of his mouth, but it lacked warmth. It was like he had set something in motion he could no longer predict. I swallowed hard. The words wouldn't come at first. I wanted to deflect, to joke, to laugh it off, but the intensity of Luke's gaze held me captive. I realized the answer wasn't about him. It was about everything I had buried, choices, regrets, longing, and the small, invisible threads connecting me to someone I hadn't allowed myself to notice before. I started, voice shaking slightly. It's someone in this room. Someone I never expected to matter this much. Luke's expression softened, almost imperceptibly. He leaned closer, not touching me, but the air between us thickened, charged with something undeniable. I could see the sharp awareness in Mark's eyes, the subtle shift in his posture, but he said nothing, waiting, watching. The confession hung in the room, suspended. Everyone else seemed to hold their breath. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears, felt the tension coiling in my stomach, and then Luke smiled. Just a small, quiet smile, the kind that reaches the eyes. It wasn't arrogant, it wasn't teasing, it was acknowledgement, understanding. The room exhaled, but I didn't. My mind raced, heart still pounding. For a moment, nothing else existed but him and the unspoken connection that had formed over the last hours. The game, the laughter, the pretense, all of it had dissolved. Then Mark cleared his throat, finally breaking the spell, and the moment shattered just enough for reality to return. "Okay," he said, voice calm but with a hint of tension. "That's enough for tonight." Everyone shifted uncomfortably, some laughing nervously, trying to reclaim the casual energy that had vanished. But I couldn't move, couldn't stop thinking about Luke, about the way the night had revealed things I didn't even know I was hiding. And just as I turned slightly, ready to step away and pretend nothing had changed, I noticed a small folded note slipped under my wine glass. No name, just handwriting that made my pulse spike. Luke hadn't said anything, but somehow he had left me a message. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. The game was over. But the night, and everything it had awakened, was far from finished. The folded note burned in my hands as I stepped away from the table, pretending to tidy a glass or brush crumbs off the counter. I didn't dare read it yet, not with Mark still watching, not with the others lingering in awkward laughter, trying to return the evening to some sense of normal. Once I was alone in the kitchen, I unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was small, deliberate, and unmistakably Luke's. It simply said, "I noticed you. I've always noticed." Nothing else. No explanation, no pressure, just a quiet acknowledgement that seemed to echo everything unspoken between us that night. My chest ached in a way I hadn't expected. There was longing there, yes, and a strange relief, like finally seeing something I'd been pretending wasn't there. I leaned against the counter, letting the words sink in. The tension from the game, from the cards, from the unspoken energy in the living room, had shifted into something softer, though no less intense. Mark had ended the game, but the real revelations of the night, about observation, attention, choices, and hidden emotions, lingered. Later, when Mark's friends had left, the apartment felt impossibly quiet. The clinking of their dishes gone, the laughter silenced, I realized the night had changed the rhythm of my life, however subtly. Mark was sprawled on the couch, scrolling on his phone, unaware, or perhaps intentionally ignoring, the undercurrent between Luke and me. I smiled faintly at the thought. Life would go on, but the texture of it had shifted. I thought about the way Luke's eyes had followed me, the way his attention had felt both unsettling and comforting. And I realized that sometimes people notice you in ways you don't even expect, in moments you don't plan for, and that acknowledgement can linger longer than any overt confession. Mark finally looked up, catching my gaze for a moment. We shared a quiet smile, the kind that acknowledges history and routine without speaking too loudly. I felt a flicker of gratitude for him, for the life we'd built, for the boundaries we shared, even as I recognized the new tension that had entered our world. I placed the note carefully in my pocket, a small, private reminder of a night that had been ordinary and extraordinary all at once. The apartment smelled faintly of roasted chicken, candles burned low, and I felt the weight of hours spent on observation, desire, and subtle confessions. Some nights don't end the way you expect. Some games reveal more than anyone intends. And sometimes, the smallest gestures, the brush of a hand, a lingering glance, a folded note, leave marks that outlast the laughter, the clatter, and even the passing of hours. I sighed, letting the silence settle around me. The night was over, but the memory of it, and everything it had quietly uncovered, would stay with me far longer than I ever imagined.